Brand versus performance marketing. Whereas previously it used to be a blended approach, both have been seen as a holistic approach to marketing. As of recently, marketing as a whole discipline is becoming more fragmented depending upon the goal of the company or the business that you're in. So now we have brand marketing and we have performance marketing as fragmented marketing disciplines. Let's go very basic here. Brand marketing is essentially a type of marketing that's also called pull marketing. We're trying to pull customers in to almost give them a warm welcome into the brand or the product or service that you're selling. So when we think about the type of advertising copy or campaigns we deploy for brand, it's very much a warm welcome. We're not inclining that customer to take any form of action. We're not trying to date the customer just yet. We're just introducing ourselves. Whereas performance marketing, very much correlated to the idea of push marketing, we're pushing our agenda to that specific prospect or customer in order to incline them to respond to our messaging. We want them to buy, we want them to click on the ad, we want them to convert. Performance marketing, highly correlated to what we also know as direct response marketing or direct marketing. Performance marketing is inclining the customer to essentially take an action. So this is when we ask the other person to go on a date or maybe get married. Right, so it's a bigger commitment. So I'm going to expand more on this because there's a lot of nuances. Should I focus on brand marketing? Should I focus on performance marketing? Should I focus on both? How do I split my focus or the advertising budget? We'll get to that in a couple of seconds, potentially minutes. When you're a newer business or a smaller business, generally speaking, you're going to focus much more on performance marketing because what you want is initial metrics or insights that almost validate the business. But once the business is becoming more validated, maybe you're a startup that's found product market fit, you know that people want this product, you just need more reach or visibility, you start to value brand marketing a lot more because brand marketing tends to be cheaper in terms of ad impressions, and generally speaking, there's just a lot more opportunity for you to introduce yourself to a wider audience as opposed to performance. Some of the companies that mostly relied on brand marketing, so companies like Nike, Apple, Red Bull, and even Disney, we don't really see a lot of campaigns for these companies when we've initially heard of them. Let's be honest, right? Maybe depending on your age, that could be an incorrect statement. But generally speaking, these companies have built a lot of their equity as a business through their brand, right? You don't really see Apple have a 20% discount on their newest iPhone. In fact, a lot of their advertising campaigns is very much focused on the proposition of the brand. They're not inclining you to buy the product. Again, there's nuances to that. Whereas Disney, I know I mentioned that they mostly rely on brand, but as of recently, they're expanding as a business. They now have Disney Plus, which is a subscription-based video-on-demand service, where now they might need that direct response aspect from the customers, where they might use a channel like Google search or Meta ads to promote the service, inclining customers to essentially respond and become a paying member. Even though brand and performance marketing are segmented in many ways, you'll see throughout this video that actually maybe they're just one discipline. It's just they have a different approach in terms of messaging and channels depending on where the user journey is or where the customer journey is. One of your questions might be, our customer acquisition cost or CAC for a brand marketing campaign is very expensive. Should we still carry on deploying brand marketing campaigns? When you're talking about brand marketing, the goal isn't to acquire customers. It isn't a conversion-based goal, right? Your CAC is not even a factor when you're thinking about brand marketing. And it shouldn't, right? Because brand marketing, as I'll expand on now, it has a different objective, it has a different focus, it has different metrics that it needs to essentially understand for it to be seen as a success, as opposed to performance marketing. So brand marketing is really your first touch point into introducing yourself to your customers, or your first touch point in terms of brand awareness. Now let's talk about the focus and the objectives of brand marketing. And I'll breeze through this fairly quickly. So we know that brand marketing, it's all about narratives, right? It's a very narrative-driven type of a campaign. So when we think about narrative, we think about storytelling, and the storytelling is really dictated by the character. And in this case, the customers that you're trying to advertise to, you start to relate to that customers, right? Whether that's their pain points, that's their wants, their needs, their desires. You're trying to cater your brand and your narrative to relate to that specific customer. Other objectives of a brand is also building awareness, gaining visibility or gaining mass visibility, right? You're trying to gain as much reach for your brand because you want to be able to understand where your customers might be. Brand recall or ad recall. What that means is essentially how memorable your brand or your advertising is. And you do that through surveys, whether that's in platform or once they've become a prospect or a customer. Brand marketing also supports customer loyalty. We know that it's a very perception-based marketing objective. So a lot of it is subjective, right? So brand marketing could include promoting your brand values, highlighting your brand visuals and making sure that's consistent across your various marketing channels, online and offline. That also includes making sure that the brand sticks to what the culture of the brand is, whatever that means for you. When you think of Nike, we think of health, athleticism, diversity and inclusion. And the moment you detract from that, you might start to lose some of your customers because it's not in line with the brand. And then finally, some of that perception-based goals of a brand is highlighting your brand mission, brand vision, and the promise of the brand. And then finally, the whole point of brand marketing is really long-term. It's a long-term play of increasing your brand equity. So brand equity is simply how people perceive your brand, right? How much market share you have. From a customer's point of view, do I trust this brand? Will I spend money with this brand? How does this brand compare to brand B or brand C or competitor A, B, C, right? So the next thing is brand metrics. How do we assess the success of a brand marketing campaign or brand marketing? Some of the metrics you might look at is reach, traffic, impression share, which is how often your ads are shown in comparison to your competitors. It could be share of voice. This is how many times your brand is mentioned in social media or the internet in general. You could take a look at upper funnel conversions like your email signups, brochure downloads, whether someone's engaging with your content or maybe they've signed up to watch a webinar. It could be a person following you on social media or engaging with your content. It could be brand sentiment, which is basically surveying your customers into how they found out about your brand and what they think of your brand. As mentioned earlier, it could be a metric like brand or ad recall, which is if your brand or ads are memorable as opposed to your competitors. It could be your NPS or your net promoter score. This is essentially a measurement of how loyal your customers are and how satisfied they are with your brand or your product or service. And you do that through surveys. So that's brand marketing. Let's quickly go on to performance marketing. All right. So some companies that mostly rely on performance marketing for the growth of their business are companies like Wayfair, GoDaddy, Groupon, Booking.com. So companies very much in the business model of direct to consumer or business to consumer. The focus and objective of performance marketing is quite simple, which is direct response. We want the customer to take an action, whether that's to click on the ad, whether that's converting them, whether that's someone installing an app or becoming a paid subscriber or becoming a lead. But really the end goal of performance marketing is to gain revenue for the business or increase its customers, preferably in a profitable manner. This is where sustainable growth becomes an important theme, which is for another video. When we talk about performance marketing, generally speaking, although it might be an always-on activity, there is a short-term play with it. And that could be, if you're an e-commerce brand, Black Friday is coming up, you might have a dedicated advertising spend to join the competition. You want to advertise when most of your customers or potentially prospects might be inclined to buy. They're willing to spend money because it's Black Friday. A lot of products are on discount, or it might be summer's coming up. You might have a summer sale and you might want to be in line with the seasonality that your business will be heading towards. There's an aspect of it being a burst campaign, although that's not always the case. Whereas, again, as opposed to brand marketing, there's a long-term strategy. Some of the metrics that you generally take a look at when you're deploying performance marketing campaigns are click-through rates, conversion rates, CAC or customer acquisition cost, CPA, cost per acquisition, ROI, return on investment or return on ad spend, LTV or lifetime value. This is essentially you forecasting the total amount of revenue you can extract from this customer throughout their whole lifetime. If you're a software as a service company or a SaaS, you might also take a look at churn or retention rates. And then finally, incrementality. So incrementality is understanding the general uplift or downlift of the results you can get from various different marketing channels, depending upon how much you increase or downweigh spends for that channel. So if I increase our paid social advertising spend, will we get an incremental uplift for our paid search or maybe even programmatic display channels? Now we know the difference between brand and performance marketing, their nuances, their focus, objectives, and the metrics we track for either. Or let's talk about seeing them as a unified discipline, which in theory it should be, right? The reality is brand and performance marketing, they really coincide together. In fact, they complement each other. And you'll notice that whenever you increase your brand marketing campaigns, you start to see uplifts in your conversion-based campaigns, right? So a very practical example of that is you might have 40% of your advertising budget towards brand marketing, and that could be deployed through YouTube or programmatic display or even paid social platforms. And then 60% of your budget will go to performance marketing channels like paid search or potentially retargeting them again on paid social. And when I say retargeting, I'm talking about retargeting the same people that have initially seen your ads or clicked through your ads via your brand marketing campaigns. Generally speaking, your brand marketing campaigns is expanding the prospects or customers that can then be funneled down to your performance marketing campaigns, which are more catered towards your bottom of funnel conversion points, right? Which is when you want someone to buy the product or become a lead. I mentioned earlier that as a marketer, your focus will change depending on the stage of the business, whereas at the beginning you might focus more on performance marketing in terms of your advertising spend, and then eventually you might funnel some of that budget back onto brand marketing as the company grows. The approach to brand and performance will evolve depending upon the business. So there is no exact science. It's pretty much a business decision, and it's a strategic decision at that, right? It depends on what the company needs. Let's say you're an early stage business or startup, and you notice that you might have a really healthy CAC, but your retention sucks. People leave after 2 weeks. Maybe this is the time to invest in brand. You want to build some sort of trust with your customers. You might want to highlight your social proof and your positive reviews, and that will help from the point of view of your potential customers. If they can trust you, they'll likely stay with you for longer. So all of a sudden, your retention rates actually improve because of your brand campaigns. There is no exact science to unifying brand and performance, but you can at least understand what does the business need right now. And that's going to be dictated by the data that you see as a business, not the data that you see within your brand and performance marketing campaigns. So now we know the difference between brand marketing and performance marketing. Let's now move on to the chapter of unifying both marketing disciplines. And in fact, that's how it really should be, because brand and performance complement each other. Marketing is really us pushing a person from point A to point B. And that's how you should think of brand and performance marketing. Brand marketing is the initial introduction, so point A, and then brand will then push on that same exact person onto point B, which is performance marketing. Obviously, the user journey is a lot more complicated than that, but I'm simplifying it for illustration purposes. As mentioned earlier, it isn't really about brand versus performance. It's about what does the business need right now. Do we need more customers and revenue from a short-term point of view? In that case, we need more budget or focus on performance marketing. Or do we need a long-term strategy to build brand equity, brand advocacy, increase our positive brand sentiment, maybe increase our brand memorability? To close off, I want to head more into a practical realm in terms of this video. Here's 5 quick ways to improve the relationship between brand and performance marketing. So the first one is, at the basic level, just understand the differences between the two and understand the relationship between both disciplines. Second is understand your attribution models. So what that means is you need to be able to see the first click model of your attributions and conversions versus last click. Very important, right? Or sometimes we're limited by the data that we see, hence having multiple sources of truth. But most analytics platforms, unfortunately, are too reliant on a last click model, or even worse, data-driven attribution, because data-driven attribution is essentially the algorithm deciding where the value of that conversion comes from. But if you're able to see a first click attribution of that same exact conversion, I can confidently say it'll probably come from your brand and marketing campaigns as opposed to performance marketing. I find that a lot of companies don't get a chance to see first click attribution, and so their strategy is very much reliant on last click or data-driven attribution, which then means a lot of your advertising spend goes on to performance marketing, which might not be the right strategy. Third is the topic of incrementality. So incrementality is understanding uplifts in your overall growth as a business and how your marketing channels affect that, whether positively or negatively. And there's really lots of ways to understand incrementality. You could do it directly in platform. You could use a marketing mix modeling agency or software to do that for you. You can also do it by understanding your average baseline metrics or KPIs and seeing, if I decrease our paid social spend, do we get an incremental uplift in paid search, or vice versa? If we decrease our paid search activity, do we get more uplifts in paid social or in our organic or direct channels, comparing it to our average baseline KPIs? So there's lots of approach there. I can do a separate video on that. If you want, let me know in the comment section below. Number 4 is, if you're a brand marketer, please communicate with your performance marketing team. Vice versa, if you're a performance marketer, communicate with your brand team. There needs to be communication happening between the two, and that could be led by your head of growth, that could be led by your CMO, that could be led by your head of marketing. But if those people aren't doing it, do it yourself. Basically understand what the other marketing function is doing. How can that potentially affect me? And what am I doing that can potentially affect them? Number 5, and the final point here, is marketing only has one goal, which is to increase the revenue or the amount of customers that the business has. And so when you do communicate with your internal stakeholders or your marketing team function, you got to keep in mind that what you're really doing is trying to connect with your customers. So whatever output you have, how does it actually communicate to your customers? And are we communicating effectively? And if so, what is the data telling us? Think of marketing, whether it's brand or performance, you're the bridge between the business and its customers. And that's a big responsibility. And I will close off the video with that point. Hopefully you've enjoyed the video. If you have, I highly encourage you to subscribe. Till next time, peace.